My name is Brenda, I'm 23 years old, and I thought I was ready for anything my rich fiancé's family could throw at me. I had spent weeks preparing for this barbecue at their mansion, buying a new dress I couldn't really afford, practicing conversations in the mirror. Marcus's family had never fully accepted me, a non-profit worker dating their golden boy lawyer's son, but I was determined to prove I belonged in their world. Little did I know that helping one lost elderly woman on my way there would completely change everything about how they saw me, and how I saw myself. Before I tell you what happened that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like button. Trust me, you won't believe how this barbecue turned out. Let me paint you a picture of my life back then. I was working at a small non-profit organization helping underprivileged kids get after-school programs. The pay was barely enough to cover my rent in a tiny studio apartment, but I loved what I did. Every day felt meaningful, even if my bank account disagreed. Marcus Blackwell was everything I wasn't. Harvard law graduate, successful corporate attorney, and heir to a real estate empire worth millions. We met at a charity auction where his firm was a sponsor. I was there representing my nonprofit, wearing a borrowed dress and feeling completely out of place among the designer gowns and expensive jewelry. But Marcus saw something in me that night. Maybe it was how passionately I spoke about the kids we helped, or how I didn't fawn over his family name like everyone else. He asked me out, and somehow, this unlikely romance bloomed. His family, however, was a different story entirely. Richard Blackwell, Marcus's father, was a man who measured people's worth by their net worth. He built his empire from the ground up and believed everyone should do the same. Except he forgot that not everyone starts with the same advantages. Every time I met him, his handshake felt like a test I was failing. Patricia Blackwell, Marcus's mother, was the epitome of high society elegance. She chaired multiple charity boards, but it always felt more about appearances than genuine caring. Her smiles toward me were polite but cold, like she was tolerating an uninvited guest at her dinner party. Then there was Stephanie, Marcus's younger sister, a Harvard undergraduate who had never worked a day in her life. She had a talent for making cutting remarks disguised as compliments. "Oh, Brenda, you're so brave to wear that outfit," was her specialty. The few times I'd been to family gatherings, I felt like an exhibit in a museum. People would ask about my little job helping children with condescending sweetness. They'd discuss vacation homes in the Hamptons while I tried to contribute to conversations about places I'd only seen in magazines. Marcus tried to bridge the gap, but he didn't understand the pressure. How could he? He'd never been the outsider looking in. When I'd express my frustrations, he'd say things like, "Just be yourself," or "They'll come around." Easy for him to say when being himself meant automatic acceptance. But this barbecue felt different. It was supposed to be a casual family gathering, not one of their formal dinner parties. I saw it as my chance to show them I could fit into their world. I saved up for months to buy a beautiful sundress from a boutique uptown. I practiced walking in heels until my feet bled. I researched current events and stock market trends so I could contribute to their conversations. The morning of the barbecue, I woke up at 6 a.m. to give myself plenty of time. I did my makeup 3 times until it looked natural but polished. I curled my hair in loose waves and chose jewelry that was nice but not too flashy. I wanted to look like I belonged without trying too hard. Marcus had texted me the night before, excited about the day. Mom's making her famous potato salad, and Dad's grilling his special burgers. "It's going to be perfect, babe. I can't wait for them to see how amazing you are." His optimism was infectious, but I still felt butterflies in my stomach as I checked my reflection one last time. Today had to go perfectly. I needed it to go perfectly. The drive to the Blackwell mansion usually took 40 minutes from my apartment. I'd made the trip enough times to know every traffic light and turn. But today felt different as I gripped the steering wheel of my 10-year-old Honda Civic. The car was reliable but looked embarrassingly modest next to the luxury vehicles that would fill their circular driveway. Dark clouds were gathering overhead, and I silently prayed the weather would hold. My dress was light blue cotton, perfect for a summer barbecue, but it would be ruined if it rained. I'd checked the forecast 3 times that morning and it showed partly cloudy skies, but those clouds looked ominous. As I drove through the affluent neighborhood where the Blackwells lived, I passed manicured lawns and houses that looked like small palaces. Each one reminded me of the gap between Marcus's world and mine. But today was going to be different. Today I was going to prove I belonged. That's when I saw her. An elderly woman stood on the sidewalk about 2 blocks from the Blackwell house, looking completely lost and confused. She appeared to be in her mid-70s, with silver hair pulled back in what had once been an etiquette bun but was now disheveled. Her clothes were expensive, a cream-colored blouse and navy slacks, but they looked wrinkled as if she'd been walking for a while. She was turning in slow circles, clutching a brown leather purse against her chest, her eyes scanning the street with growing panic. Even from my car I could see she was distressed. My first instinct was to keep driving. I was already cutting it close with timing, and Marcus had stressed how important punctuality was to his family. They take it as a sign of respect, he'd told me. Being late would give them another reason to judge me. But as I got closer, the woman looked directly at me through my windshield. Her eyes were wide with fear and confusion, and something in her expression reminded me of my own grandmother, who had passed away when I was 15. Grandma Rose had been the one person who always believed in me, who told me that kindness was more important than money or status. I couldn't just drive past. I pulled over and got out of my car, my heels clicking on the pavement as I approached her carefully. She looked fragile, like a strong wind might knock her over. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you all right?" I asked gently, keeping my voice soft and non-threatening. She turned to me with relief flooding her features. "Oh, thank goodness. I think I'm lost, dear. I went out to buy a gift for my great-grandson's birthday, and now I can't remember how to get home." Her voice was cultured and refined, with a slight tremor that spoke of both age and current distress. She introduced herself as Eleanor, and despite her confusion she maintained an air of dignity that commanded respect. "I live somewhere around here," she continued, gesturing vaguely at the expensive houses surrounding us. "But all these streets look the same to me now. I used to know this neighborhood like the back of my hand." I could see she was fighting back tears, embarrassed by her situation. It broke my heart. This was clearly a woman who had once been very capable and independent, now struggling with what seemed like early-stage dementia or simply the disorientation that can come with aging. "It's okay, Eleanor. We'll figure this out together," I assured her, already knowing I was going to be late to the barbecue but not caring anymore. Eleanor clutched my arm gratefully as I helped her think through where she lived. We went through her purse together, looking for any clues about her address. She had a prescription bottle from a local pharmacy, a business card from a charity gala, and about $200 in cash, but no driver's license or anything with a home address. "I remember there's a fountain," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "And roses. Lots of red roses in the front garden." As we talked, the sky grew darker, and I felt the first drops of rain. Perfect. My carefully planned outfit was about to be ruined, but I couldn't abandon Eleanor now. "Let's get in my car," I suggested. "We can drive around and see if anything looks familiar." Eleanor hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden, dear. You look like you have somewhere important to be." She was right, of course. I could picture Marcus checking his watch, his parents asking where I was, the family making judgments about my reliability. But looking at Eleanor's worried face, none of that seemed to matter. "You're not a burden at all," I said firmly. "Let's find your home." We drove slowly through the winding streets of the upscale neighborhood. Eleanor peered out the windows, occasionally saying, "That looks familiar," only to shake her head moments later. The rain started coming down harder, and I had to use my windshield wipers. Then my car started making a terrible grinding noise. "Oh no, no, no," I muttered as steam began rising from under the hood. My ancient Honda Civic had finally chosen the worst possible moment to break down. I managed to pull over before the engine completely died. Rain was now pouring down in sheets, and I could see Eleanor's anxiety increasing as she realized we were stranded. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "This is all my fault." "It's not your fault at all," I told her, though internally I was panicking. I was now definitely going to be very late to the barbecue, soaking wet, and probably looking like a complete mess. I called for an Uber, but the first driver took one look at Eleanor and drove away. The second driver was willing to take us, but when he saw that Eleanor had a small terrier dog in her purse that I hadn't noticed before, he refused. "No pets," he said curtly, and drove off. By this time we were both getting soaked. My carefully styled hair was hanging in wet strings, my makeup was probably running down my face, and my expensive dress was clinging to me uncomfortably. "We'll have to walk," I decided, looking at Eleanor's concerned face. "How far do you think your house might be?" "I honestly don't know, dear," she admitted. "But I can't ask you to walk in this weather. You'll ruin your beautiful dress." My phone was buzzing constantly, Marcus calling, probably wondering where I was. I sent him a quick text. "Helping someone, will be late, explain later." He immediately called back. "Brenda, where are you? Dad's already asking about you, and you know how he gets about punctuality." "I found an elderly woman who's lost," I explained quickly. "I can't just leave her. Can't you call the police or someone else to help? This is really important to me." His words stung, but I understood his position. He was caught between his family's expectations and supporting me. "I'll be there as soon as I can," I promised and hung up. Eleanor had been listening and looked stricken. "Oh dear, I'm ruining something important for you, aren't I?" "No," I said firmly, though my heart was racing with anxiety about what the Blackwells would think. "Some things are more important than being on time." We started walking, Eleanor leaning on my arm for support. Her little dog, which she called Duchess, peeked out from her purse occasionally. Despite the circumstances, Eleanor began sharing stories about her life. She'd been married for 52 years before her husband passed away 3 years ago. She had 2 children, 4 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. "I used to be so independent," she said wistfully. "I drove everywhere, managed all our finances, organized charity events. Now I get confused going to the grocery store." My heart ached for her. This was someone's grandmother, someone's mother, wandering lost and afraid. How could I have even considered driving past her? After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, Eleanor suddenly stopped in front of a massive iron gate. "That's it," she exclaimed, pointing at an enormous mansion with a fountain in the front courtyard, and rose gardens on either side of the driveway. "That's my house." I stared at the palatial estate, easily twice the size of the Blackwell mansion. Eleanor wasn't just well off, she was incredibly wealthy. But more importantly, she was safe. A groundskeeper came running out with an umbrella when he saw us approaching. "Mrs. Ashford," he called out in relief, "we've been so worried your daughter called the police when you didn't come home." Eleanor squeezed my hand. "This angel found me and made sure I got home safely," she told him, gesturing to me. As we reached the front door, Eleanor turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You sacrificed your own plans to help a confused old woman. Anyone would have done the same," I replied, though I wasn't sure that was true. "No, dear," Eleanor said, studying my face intently. "Not everyone would have stopped, and certainly not everyone would have stayed." After making sure Eleanor was safely inside and had contacted her family, I called another Uber. By now I was a complete disaster. My dress was muddy and soaked through. My shoes were ruined. My hair was a tangled mess, and I could only imagine what my makeup looked like. I was 2 hours late to the barbecue, and I looked like I'd been swimming in a swamp. But somehow, helping Eleanor had put everything in perspective. Yes, I wanted Marcus's family to accept me, but not at the cost of ignoring someone who needed help. As the Uber pulled up to the Blackwell mansion, I took a deep breath and prepared for the worst reception of my life. The Blackwell mansion was ablaze with lights and filled with the sound of laughter and conversation drifting from the backyard. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Mercedes, BMWs, a couple of Teslas, and even a Bentley. My Uber driver gave me a curious look as he dropped me off at this obviously exclusive gathering, probably wondering how someone who looked like a drowned rat belonged here. The security guard at the front gate did a double take when he saw me approaching. I could see him trying to figure out if I was a guest who'd had an accident or someone who shouldn't be there at all. "I'm Brenda Collins," I told him, trying to smooth down my wet hair. "I'm Marcus Blackwell's fiancée." He checked his list, then looked at me again with barely concealed bewilderment before opening the gate. As I walked around to the backyard, I could hear the party in full swing. The Blackwells had outdone themselves as usual. White tents with flowing fabric covered elegant seating areas. String lights created a magical ambiance, and servers in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne and appetizers. The guest list appeared to be a who's who of the city's elite, all impeccably dressed and perfectly groomed. And then there was me. I caught my reflection in one of the patio doors and nearly gasped. My blue dress, which had been so perfect this morning, was now stained with mud and clinging to me awkwardly. My hair hung in damp, tangled strands around my face. My makeup had mostly washed away, except for some stubborn mascara that had created dark smudges under my eyes. My expensive shoes were caked with mud and grass stains. I looked exactly like what Richard Blackwell would call trash. The moment I stepped onto the patio, conversations began to slow and stop. Heads turned in my direction, and I could practically feel the judgment washing over me like another wave of rain. Women in their designer sundresses and men in their perfectly pressed polo shirts stared at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disgust. Marcus spotted me first and came rushing over, his face a mixture of relief and horror. "Brenda, thank God you're okay. I was worried sick when you didn't answer your phone." He wrapped his arms around me, not caring that I was soaking wet, but I could feel his tension. "What happened to you?" Before I could answer, Richard Blackwell's voice boomed across the patio. Well. Look what the cat dragged in." The party fell completely silent. Even the servers stopped moving, sensing the tension in the air. Richard strode toward us, his face dark with disapproval and embarrassment. Behind him, Patricia looked mortified, her hand pressed to her chest in shock. Stephanie was barely containing her laughter, already reaching for her phone to probably take pictures. "This is a respectable gathering," Richard continued, his voice carrying across the entire patio so everyone could hear. "We have business associates here, family friends, people who matter in this community." He stopped directly in front of me, his eyes scanning me from head to toe with undisguised contempt. "You look like trash," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't know what game you're playing, showing up to our home looking like you crawled out of a gutter, but this is disrespectful to our family and our guests." The words hit me like physical blows. I could feel tears starting to form in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of all these people. Some guests were openly staring now, others were pretending to look away while obviously listening to every word. "Dad, that's enough," Marcus said weakly, but his voice lacked conviction. I could see he was torn between defending me and avoiding a scene that would make things worse. "Is it?" Richard shot back. "Look at her, Marcus. Look at what she thinks is appropriate for a family gathering. What will people think? What will they say about our family?" Patricia stepped forward, her voice syrupy sweet but cutting. "Darling," she said to me, "if you're going to make excuses for your appearance, at least make them believable. We're not children." Stephanie couldn't contain herself anymore. "Maybe she got lost on her way to a homeless shelter," she whispered loudly to her friends, causing a ripple of snickers. I tried to speak, to explain about Eleanor and the car breaking down and everything that had happened, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. How could I make them understand when they'd already decided I was lying? "I was helping someone," I managed to say, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be, "an elderly woman who was lost in the rain." Richard's laugh was harsh and mocking. "How convenient. And I suppose this mystery woman will vouch for your story?" She was confused. She had dementia or something similar, I continued, knowing how weak it sounded even as I said it. "Of course she did," Patricia said with fake sympathy. "How very noble of you to help an imaginary old woman instead of respecting your commitment to our family." The humiliation was overwhelming. I could feel every eye on me, could imagine what each person was thinking. The non-profit girl who couldn't even dress appropriately for a simple barbecue. The gold digger who didn't know her place. The embarrassment to the Blackwell name. "Perhaps," Richard said, his voice dripping with disdain, "you should leave and clean yourself up before attempting to join proper society again. Come back when you can show the respect this family deserves." That was it, the final blow. He was throwing me out, in front of all these people, like I was some kind of vagrant who'd wandered onto the property by mistake. Marcus started to protest again, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was embarrassed too, caught between his family's expectations and whatever loyalty he felt toward me. I was about to turn and leave, to save what little dignity I had left, when I heard a familiar voice from behind me. "Brenda, is that you, dear?" Every single person on that patio turned toward the voice, and I felt my heart skip a beat as I recognized it. Eleanor was walking slowly across the patio, but she looked completely different from the confused, lost woman I'd helped hours earlier. She was immaculately dressed in an elegant navy dress with pearls, her silver hair styled perfectly, and she carried herself with an authority that seemed to command respect from everyone present. This was clearly not a woman who got lost on random street corners. This was someone important, but her eyes were focused entirely on me, and they were bright with recognition and warmth. "My dear girl," she said, making her way directly to me while completely ignoring everyone else. "What are you doing here?" I was so shocked I could barely speak. "Eleanor, but how? What are you doing here?" The entire patio was watching this exchange with fascination. I could see confusion on the faces of the Blackwell family. Richard's expression had shifted from anger to bewilderment, while Patricia looked like she was trying to figure out how this elegant woman knew me. Eleanor reached me and took my hands in hers, seemingly unbothered by my bedraggled appearance. "This is the angel I was telling you about, Mother," said a voice from the patio doors. A distinguished man in his 50s approached us, and I realized he must be Eleanor's son. But what shocked me even more was the way Richard Blackwell's face had gone completely white. "Hello, Richard," Eleanor said, finally acknowledging him with a cool nod. "Mother," Richard replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Mother, Eleanor was Richard's mother. She was Marcus's grandmother. She was the matriarch of the Blackwell family empire. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. This wasn't just some confused elderly woman I'd helped. This was one of the wealthiest, most powerful women in the city, and I'd spent the afternoon walking through the rain with her, treating her like any person who needed help. "I think we need to have a conversation," Eleanor said, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone on the patio stand a little straighter. She turned to address the crowd of guests, her voice projecting clearly across the space. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Miss Brenda Collins. This afternoon, when I was lost and confused in the rain, she stopped her car to help me. She ruined her beautiful dress, sacrificed her own plans, and made sure I got home safely to my family." The silence on the patio was deafening. I could see guests exchanging glances, trying to process this information. Eleanor continued, "She didn't know who I was. She had no idea that helping me might benefit her in any way. She simply saw an old woman who needed assistance, and she provided it without hesitation." She turned to look directly at Richard, and I could see steel in her eyes. "Which is more than I can say for the family that was supposed to welcome her here tonight." Richard looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. Patricia's face had gone pale, and Stephanie was staring at her grandmother with wide eyes. "Now then," Eleanor continued, "I understand there's been some discussion about appearances and respect. Let me tell you what I observed today about respect." She gestured to me, still holding my hand. "I watched this young woman choose kindness over convenience. I watched her sacrifice her own comfort and plans to help a stranger. I watched her show patience and gentleness to someone who was confused and frightened. These, I believe, are the qualities that truly matter." The guests were hanging on every word now, and I could see several people nodding in agreement. "As for appearances," Eleanor said, looking around the patio, "I see a young woman who got dirty and wet helping someone in need. I find that far more beautiful than any designer dress." She turned back to Richard, and her voice took on a sharper edge. "What I don't find beautiful is a family that would judge and humiliate someone for showing compassion. What I don't find respectable is making assumptions about people without hearing their story." Richard started to speak, but Eleanor held up her hand. "I'm not finished," she said firmly. "You see, I've been watching this family for some time now, observing how you treat people you consider beneath you. Today confirmed everything I suspected." She looked around the patio at all the guests. "I built this family's fortune on principles of integrity, compassion, and treating all people with dignity. It seems those lessons have been forgotten." The transformation in the crowd was remarkable. People who had been staring at me with judgment minutes earlier were now looking at me with respect, even admiration. The social dynamic had completely shifted. Eleanor smiled at me warmly. "My dear, would you do me the honor of sitting with me? I think it's time this family learned what true class looks like." The aftermath of Eleanor's revelation was swift and dramatic. Richard scrambled to salvage the situation, his face red with embarrassment as he realized he'd just publicly humiliated the woman his own mother was praising. "Brenda, we didn't understand," he stammered. His earlier authority completely evaporated. "If I'd known about the circumstances—" "But you didn't want to know," Eleanor interrupted coolly. "You made assumptions based on appearances and never bothered to ask for the full story." Patricia rushed forward with a bright, fake smile plastered on her face. "Brenda, dear, you must be exhausted. Let me get you some dry clothes. We're exactly the same size. I'm sure I have something perfect for you." The sudden change in her demeanor was almost comical. 20 minutes ago she'd been suggesting I was a liar, and now she was treating me like her long-lost daughter. Stephanie appeared at my other side, her earlier cruelty replaced by nervous energy. "Oh my God, Brenda, I can't believe you helped grandmother. That's so amazing. I mean, what are the odds?" The guests, too, had completely shifted their behavior. People who had been staring at me with disgust were now approaching with admiration and curiosity. I heard whispers of how wonderful and what a kind heart, and I always liked her. But the person I was watching most carefully was Marcus. He stood slightly apart from his family, and I could see a complex mix of emotions playing across his face: relief that the crisis had passed, but also something deeper. Understanding, maybe, or shame. Eleanor guided me to the head table, the place of honor usually reserved for Richard and Patricia. She made it clear that I was to sit beside her, in the position typically given to the most important guest. "Now then," she announced to the gathering, "I think it's time we properly celebrated. Brenda, would you tell everyone about the work you do? I'm sure our guests would find it fascinating." And just like that, I found myself the center of positive attention instead of negative judgment. People genuinely wanted to hear about the nonprofit, about the children we helped, about the programs we ran. Several guests mentioned they'd love to get involved or make donations. But throughout it all, I felt oddly disconnected from the praise. Yes, it was vindicating to have Eleanor's support, and yes, it felt good to finally be accepted by Marcus's social circle. But there was something that bothered me about how quickly everyone had changed their tune. During a quiet moment, Eleanor leaned over to me. "I owe you an explanation," she said softly. "What happened today wasn't entirely by chance." I looked at her questioningly. "I've been concerned about this family for some time," she continued. "Money and success have a way of hardening hearts, and I've watched my son and his family become increasingly judgmental and elitist. I've been looking for a way to teach them a lesson about what really matters." My stomach dropped a little. "So you planned this?" "Not exactly," Eleanor said quickly. "I really was lost this afternoon. The confusion, the fear, that was all real. But when I saw how you helped me, how you sacrificed for a stranger, I realized you might be exactly the person this family needed to meet." She patted my hand gently. "I didn't orchestrate our meeting, dear, but I may have encouraged the lesson it provided." I wasn't sure how to feel about that. On one hand, I was grateful for Eleanor's support. On the other hand, it made me wonder if the family's newfound acceptance was genuine or just fear of disappointing the family matriarch. Marcus finally approached our table, looking sheepish and uncertain. "Brenda, can we talk privately?" he asked. I excused myself from Eleanor and followed Marcus to a quiet corner of the garden. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I should have defended you more strongly. I should have trusted you when you said you were helping someone." I could see he was genuinely troubled, but I wasn't sure sorry was enough. "You were embarrassed by me," I said quietly. "Before you knew about Eleanor, you were ashamed of how I looked." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he admitted finally. "I was, and I hate that about myself." His honesty was unexpected, and I appreciated it more than false excuses would have been. "I love you, Brenda," he continued. "But I've been so worried about my family's approval that I lost sight of what really matters. Today showed me that you have more integrity in your little finger than most people have in their entire bodies." "And what about tomorrow?" I asked. "When your grandmother isn't here to defend me, when it's just your family and me again?" Marcus was quiet, considering the question seriously. "Then I'll defend you myself," he said finally. "The way I should have today. The way I should have been doing all along." I wanted to believe him, but trust, once broken, takes time to repair. As the evening continued, the party took on a completely different atmosphere. Eleanor regaled guests with stories about building the family business, about the importance of treating employees well, about using wealth responsibly. It was clear she was sending messages to her son and daughter-in-law about the values she expected them to uphold. Richard spent most of the evening trying to make amends, but his apologies felt hollow after his public humiliation of me. Patricia's sudden friendliness was equally unconvincing, but Eleanor's warmth toward me felt genuine. As the party wound down, she pulled me aside once more. "I'd like to see you again soon," she said. "Not because of Marcus or this family, but because I genuinely enjoyed our time together today. Would you join me for tea this week?" That invitation meant more to me than all the others' newfound acceptance combined. The weeks following the barbecue brought unexpected changes to my life. Eleanor kept her promise about tea, and those weekly visits became the highlight of my week. She was nothing like the confused woman I'd met on the street. She was sharp, witty, and full of stories about building a business empire in an era when few women held such power. "The secret," she told me during one of our conversations, "is never forgetting where you came from or who helped you along the way." She shared stories about her early marriage to Marcus's grandfather, how they'd started with nothing but ambition and determination. She talked about the importance of treating employees fairly, of giving back to the community, of remembering that wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. But more than her wisdom, I treasured her friendship. Eleanor saw me for who I really was, not as Marcus's girlfriend or a potential Blackwell family member, but as Brenda. She asked about my work with genuine interest, offered advice about managing nonprofit challenges, and even connected me with other philanthropists who could support our programs. The relationship with Marcus's family evolved more slowly. Richard's transformation was the most dramatic. The man who had called me trash now went out of his way to show respect, but it felt calculated rather than genuine. He'd ask about my work, compliment my dress, include me in conversations, but I could sense he was performing for Eleanor's benefit rather than acting from the heart. Patricia's change was more subtle but perhaps more meaningful. She began asking real questions about the children we helped at the nonprofit, and eventually admitted she'd never really understood what I did. "I always assumed charity work was just writing checks," she confessed during one family dinner. "I didn't realize how hands-on and difficult it really is." She even started volunteering at our after-school program. and I was surprised to discover she was genuinely good with the kids when she dropped her society lady facade. Stephanie's evolution was the most authentic. She was young enough to recognize her behavior had been cruel and mature enough to genuinely apologize. I was jealous, she admitted to me one afternoon. Marcus had never brought anyone home who actually challenged our family before. Everyone else just kissed up to Dad and tried to fit in. You were different, and it made me uncomfortable. She started helping with our social media campaigns for the nonprofit, using her marketing classes to create content that significantly boosted our online presence. But the most important change was in Marcus himself. The man who had stood silent while his father humiliated me began finding his voice. He started pushing back against his family's elitist attitudes, defending not just me, but anyone they unfairly judged. I realized I'd been complicit, he told me one evening as we walked through the park near my apartment. Not just in how they treated you, but in how they treated service workers, employees, anyone they considered beneath them. He began volunteering at the nonprofit too, using his legal skills to help families navigate bureaucracy and access services. Seeing him interact with our kids, treating them with the same respect he'd show to his father's business partners, made me fall in love with him all over again. The most significant change came when Eleanor announced she was establishing a new foundation focused on supporting small nonprofits like mine. She asked me to help design the program, and eventually offered me a position as the foundation's executive director. You understand what it's like to struggle for resources, she said. You know how to make every dollar count. Most importantly, you remember why this work matters. The salary was triple what I made at my current job, but more than the money, it was validation. Eleanor was entrusting me with millions of dollars because she believed in my abilities and judgment. But the offer also created a new challenge. Would accepting it change how people saw me? Would I become just another wealthy person who'd forgotten her roots? That's up to you, Eleanor said when I shared my concerns. Money doesn't change who you are unless you let it. I've watched you for months now, and I don't think you're the type to forget where you came from. 6 months after that disastrous barbecue, Marcus proposed. Not at some fancy restaurant or exotic location, but at the nonprofit during our after-school program. He got down on one knee in front of 30 kids who started cheering and clapping, and he said the words I'd never expected to hear from him. I want to marry the woman who stops in the rain to help strangers. I want to marry someone who chooses kindness over convenience, who judges people by their hearts instead of their bank accounts. I want to marry someone who makes me want to be a better person. The ring was beautiful, but his words meant more than any piece of jewelry ever could. As I sit here today, 2 years after accepting Eleanor's job offer and 1 year after marrying Marcus, I often think about that rainy afternoon that changed everything. The nonprofit foundation I now run has supported over 200 small organizations, helping them expand their programs and reach more people in need. Richard never fully transformed, but he learned to treat people with basic respect. More importantly, he learned that his opinion of someone doesn't determine their worth. Patricia discovered a passion for hands-on charity work that surprised everyone, including herself. She now spends 3 days a week working directly with families in need, and the experience has softened her considerably. Stephanie graduated from Harvard and turned down a high-paying consulting job to work for a nonprofit in Boston. She calls me regularly for advice about fundraising and program development. Marcus and I bought a modest house in a middle-class neighborhood, despite being able to afford something much grander. We host BBQs of our own now, and our guest list includes the kids from our programs, their families, volunteers, and anyone else who wants to join us. Eleanor loves these gatherings, often saying they remind her of the dinner parties she and her husband used to host when they were young and building their business. But the most profound change has been in how I see myself. That day on the patio, when Richard called me trash, I almost believed him. I almost let their judgment define my worth. Eleanor's intervention saved me from that, but more importantly, it taught me that true acceptance can't be demanded or performed. It has to be earned through character and given freely through love. I still stop to help people on the side of the road. Last month, I helped a young father change a flat tire in the rain. The week before that, I gave directions to a tourist who was hopelessly lost. These interactions rarely lead to dramatic revelations or life-changing moments, but they don't need to. The value isn't in what you might get back, it's in the simple act of caring about another human being. Eleanor and I still have tea every Wednesday. She's become the grandmother I lost years ago, the mentor I never expected to find, and one of my dearest friends. She often jokes that she's grooming me to take over the family foundation when she's no longer able to run it. You understand what this money is really for, she tells me. It's not to build monuments to our ego or buy acceptance in society. It's to help people build better lives, to create opportunities where none existed before. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that day. Would Marcus and I have eventually broken up under the pressure of his family's disapproval? Would I have continued struggling at my small nonprofit, always fighting for resources? Would the Blackwell family ever have learned to see beyond their privilege? But then I remember something Eleanor said during one of our first tea sessions. Life isn't about the paths we didn't take, dear. It's about making the most of the path we're on. The path I'm on now is better than anything I could have imagined that morning when I was getting ready for a barbecue, desperate for acceptance from people who didn't know me. I learned that day that sometimes you have to weather the storm to find your rainbow, and that the right people will see your heart no matter what you look like on the outside. And you know what? I still stop to help lost souls on the road, because you never know whose grandmother you might be helping home. Have you ever had a moment where helping someone led to unexpected consequences in your own life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about kindness, family, and finding where you truly belong. Share this with someone who might need a reminder that true character shines brightest when we think no one important is watching. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the most ordinary acts of kindness can lead to the most extraordinary changes in our lives. Until next time, keep your hearts open and your hands ready to help.